The Splunk legal team requires that we share the following. As you might expect, we'll be making forward-looking statements about our business and financial performance during the course of this presentation. Those statements are subject to risks and uncertainties that are described in our filings with the SEC. We ask that you refrain from audio or video recording or rebroadcasting any of the content.
Hi, am I live? Yes, I am live. Great. Hello, and welcome to Factoring in Single Sign-On Integration, Setting Up SAML in Your Environment. My name is Caroline, or Kat McGee. I'm a Senior Assigned Expert under Subscription Services, which is a subset of Professional Services.
And I am Charlie Huggard. I'm also known as the Teddy Bear. My title is now, Site Reliability Engineering. I'm part of our Cloud Operations Group.
A little bit, so we were not always like strong Splunk admins. You know, we had to grow up a little bit too and get our little fezzes, but a little bit about why we think we can talk about this. I was a professional services consultant, deliver it for you, turned assigned expert. I have 8 years of Splunk experience, and I'm a SAML SME, and so is he.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah. My background's more development side coming over, but hey, hopefully, from this talk, you get a nice crash course into SAML and how it can work for you with Splunk. And right.
Now it's your turn.
Yeah, it is my turn. And that's right. Yeah, so I'm going to go over some of the broad strokes of SAML and how it works and why it's designed that way. Kat will get into configuring Splunk configuring SAML for Splunk itself. I'll go into some troubleshooting, and Kat, of course, is our federal expert, and so might get into CAC and PIV, because smart cards are very fun. So what is the deal with single sign-on? And yes, as I'm the teddy bear, I marked my slot where I was supposed to come in with Winnie the Pooh, because why not? And because it's public domain now. Anyway. So we have our fictional company called Buttercup Foods. The reason I have Buttercup Foods is because when did we do that talk?
It was a couple of years ago. He made a bread pun, and we just kind of stuck with it, because we were doing rolls, so ROLLS.
I need to have rolls of rolls.
It took me literally until the day before our conference talk to get the joke. So that's on me.
The cat brioche. Anyway. So you have a new employee that's joining our organization. They need access to a number of different applications. So one way that this can happen is so the IT organization might go and decide, let me go set up an account for this user on each and every different application out there. And if you thought this was a good idea, please return to the early 90s and don't come here.
The 90s are calling.
That's a pain to manage in separate credentials on all your applications. So let's take a different approach. So if we have a directory, unified directory, we can create one account there, and then every application, I sign into the application, I pass my credentials there, it goes against the directory, verifies the credentials, and come back. Well, what happens when my application instead is in cloud? So I pass my credentials to a cloud provider, or it goes, verifies my credentials against a directory of some kind, and then gets access back. But if I have someone in that cloud service, now has all of my credentials are flowing through, so they could capture my username, password, and let me go log into anything else using the same username and password, which will go happily verify against my directory and let them in. And boy, that's a little frustrating. So in order to make this better, what if we flip it on its head? Let's put the directory in the middle. And so I authenticate to the directory, and then when I want access to a particular application, that directory gives me a unique credential to a particular application. And then if I get to a different application, my cloud provider, I have a completely different credential. Hopefully that was noticeable. That one's in orange, and that one's yellow and slightly different shaped, is what it's supposed to represent. But this time, if the same adversary is sitting in the cloud, they get this credential that is useless to go and move to a different application. And that is basically SAML login in a nutshell. Yes, I make very bad jokes on slides, and Yeah, anyway. So some terms you should know about SAML. Your directory is your identity provider. It's how, where the accounts live, who is asserting you are a valid person. Then you have a service provider or a relying party. These are the applications that are, you're logging into. Both sides have a set of metadata, certificates to verify yes, one side or the other. We'll get into that a little bit later. And part of the setup is you trade this metadata between both sides. So that way you have an assertion that goes from the identity provider to the relying party. And usually this is happening, especially with web interfaces, this is happening through you as having the web browser as the intermediary. Sometimes it goes direct from the service provider relying party, but usually it's for a login flow, it's using you to go through. And SAML is actually very, very wide spec, believe it or not. In this talk, we're very focused on a web single sign-on as well as attribute query request. This says 2 profiles, but there's actually a whole bunch of other different profiles in SAML itself. For example, a single logout service. You can actually discover where the identity provider is. You can actually rename users using SAML. Part of the problem, though, is not every identity provider, not every relying party actually implements every piece of the spec, and actually a lot of them don't. And there's also nuances to different implementations of the spec. But it's something interesting to understand about. It's a giant protocol, but you're really interested only in this small little piece of it. And now it's time to go down the rabbit hole and let Kat take over.
So we're going to pretty much be going through the Splunk native integration, basically how to set it up, what tools you're going to need for this, and then we're going to go into 3 of the most common IDPs I've encountered, which is Azure, Okta, and Duo. Those are the 3 that I've covered. I've also done a little bit of notes on like Shibboleth and but those are the main things. So the first thing is the prerequisites to your metadata file. I highly recommend filling out the redirect and the fully qualified domain name. If you don't put this in, then you're gonna have to add it later, and it's just kind of a pain. And I
think someone mentioned before having their search heads behind a load balancer. Tell Splunk where is your load balancer address here, so that way when the assertions are coming through, it understands. Yeah.
We also made a note at the bottom there specifically saying that. Then you're going to download your metadata file and send it over to your other, basically your IDP, whatever it may be, and we'll go through that. So by default, the generated metadata file will only have the leaf. You need the leaf and the intermediate and the root to be passed, or else you will typically encounter, we can't validate this isn't working, especially if you're doing like AQR or extended, because it just can't validate. So Azure, it's kind of like LDAP. Also, I do know that they recently renamed it Intra. It was after they locked the slides, I'm sorry. So basically what we're gonna do is we're gonna add an enterprise application, and it's going to be Azure AD SSO for Splunk Enterprise and Splunk Cloud. This will work with both. So we're gonna do a setup single sign-on, and obviously SAML, because we don't want to have it disabled. If you are not using this, if you are doing a test version of this, the second you are done, disable it, because you will still be able to hit it even if you just are like, oh, we're not gonna use this for now. If it's not disabled, you can still use it. You can also technically pass your credentials through, and it's actually kind of fun to do that. So the 3 things that you're gonna need are the identifier, the reply, and the sign-on URL. Some of these are going to be populated once you add, but it's basically the exact same thing, including the load balancer that you put in when you originally were setting up the Splunk side of it. So I specifically chose splunkcloud.com because I'm not gonna guess what you named your environment. This is a very simple way. Obviously take out Splunk Cloud if it's not that. And SAML ACS will work 9 times out of 10 for Splunk. You want to do the app launcher home. We'll talk about a little bit of bypassing SAML later in case you're troubleshooting or you can't specifically get through this, but it's just kind of a lot of this is fill in the blanks. When you're done, it should look like this. On the attributes and claims side, these are going to be stuff that is specific to your IDP. You will probably not know what these are by default. If you are using AQRs, you are going, or anything that has to query, you're going to need either SAM account name or user principal name are the only two that are going to be valid. You can work around it, and I'll go into that a little bit later. But you're going to download it, and then you are going to select it, and then you're going to add the entity ID. That's the last little step, and then you'll be done. And these should be filling in. If you do not see this fill in, then you have downloaded the wrong file or you have uploaded the wrong file. You do not have the information you need. So these two are specific to Azure, and also technically you can do it with Active Directory too, but it's a little bit weirder. If you, your role, there's a few that we can do for this. So there's rolling groups for role. Real name is usually Windows account name or display name. And mail is usually name or name identifier. I have seen email more recently, but that was until like, I would say 7-9 months ago. That was not the most common, it was these two. But you can always edit it based on what your IDP says you're using for these values. Go for them first. Okta.
Roll through all these identity providers.
Does anybody have any questions on Azure before I move forward? Cool. So we're going to, again, browse the app catalog because it's fun. We're going to get Splunk. We have a few choices. We have Splunk Enterprise and Splunk Cloud. We're just going to go with Splunk Cloud for now because I got to test it on Splunk Cloud and I didn't want to create an entire new division for it. We're going to add the integration. And keep in mind, all of this is pretty much the exact same regardless of it, of whether you're using on-premise or cloud, because we set it up to be across the board. Same thing. Application label, that is your own preference. It is whatever you can look at and at a dime just be like, this is exactly what I want. You can name it ES, you can name it core, you can name it cloud, you can name it this product that we have to buy and use, for all I care, site URL, entity ID. You can kind of tell that the entity ID is going to be the same one over on the other side as well. It is whatever you have named it. So, sign-on methods, and these are the sign-on and the metadata URLs. Just keep scrolling past this. This isn't something you're going to need. You will need to view, so Azure has a nice little, like, let's download the IDP metadata, and Okta's like, let's go into a new, like, page, which you get to save as, and then you get the metadata. And then, oh yeah, I did do Splunk Enterprise. Oh, good for me. Splunk Enterprise, it's basically the same thing, except you're going to be doing your other IDP, your other URL. You're not .splunkcloud.com. And make sure if you're doing an application label and you have Splunk Cloud and Splunk Cloud on-prem, you name them differently. I have seen it a lot where they accidentally pass the wrong ones and they're confused why it's not working and why the metadata isn't correct. And I go in and I'm like, oh, do you have two environments? So same thing, keep scrolling. On-prem actually does have the identity provider metadata for a download. So that's kind of convenient, and we don't have that in the Splunk Cloud configuration one. So again, back to here, select the file. I always name it like Okta metadata with the date that I actually do it, so I know exactly where I'm at with the integration process. And then make sure you get the entity ID in. They've got to match. If they do not match, it will say failed, cannot validate, failed, entity ID not the same. Redirect to URL after logout, that's kind of a personal preference. If you just want it to go to your home page, for your company, great. So Duo. Very simple. Splunk Enterprise. Click for single sign-on, and you're just going to protect. So entity ID is going to be the same one that we've been using. Obviously, you're going to have a different entity ID than Splunk Buttercup Foods. Assertion consumer service URL. That's just basically going to be whatever URL you're doing. The groups, so that's specific to, you probably have groups through your IDP or groups that you want to separate out. These are going to be like, you want a group for admins, you want a group for power users. That's going to be where you have that group name that is equivalent to the one on the Splunk side, and then you'll assign the Duo group to that. I tend to keep, for Duo, I do just email address and display name. That seems to be the easiest for Duo, but you can also do others. So there are a few others. Ping Federate. Ping Federate would not let us screenshot, so we get text for this one. So basically you do IDP initiated, assertion creation, as well as like the format email address, and then you need to extend the contract to include attribute, role, and format, or else it will not work. And then you also got to map the SAML subject to the mail and map attribute role, or else it's just going to start failing. And make sure that you do enable redirect and post, or else it will not be able to pass, and you'll basically it will basically ask who you are multiple times, and you'll have to just keep re-verifying. If you're hitting that with Ping Federate, most likely the fix is going to be the redirect and post. Shibboleth. How many of you guys are using Shibboleth? It's a fun tool. Yeah, okay, a few people. So basically, you need to, it's most likely going to be that. So that would be your Shibboleth URL. And if you're running into problems, the Splunk D log will have the specific errors and warnings that you're encountering. It's going to be very clear, more clear than I usually see with IDP providers. And you can just bypass it from that. These are the XML files that you will need. These are only on-prem. Usually the cloud, it's a lot easier to set up, but for on-prem, there's the attribute filter, resolver, and the metadata provider and relying parties. So that should just generally get you started if you are using Shibboleth. And if you have any questions on how to use it with Splunk Cloud, always feel free to reach out. And then that's going to be your settings in authentication.conf. Okay. If you have messed everything up and you failed and you just keep hitting the wall of like unauthorized redirect, you can put ENUS account login ? Login type equals Splunk, and it will bypass your SAML and allow you to log in with your Splunk native username.
So pro tip, when you're setting up SAML, have a local account so that you can fall back on. Otherwise, things go sideways, you will get locked out.
I've actually seen it in Splunk Cloud where somebody named it the same as their SAML account, and they couldn't get in, so they had to call me to get in for them. And so I created them a break glass
Mike,
account.
If you can ask into the mic, they're doing recordings for questions. Oh, yes.
Yeah, please.
Oh, is the mic
louder.
on? We have a question.
So there's another pro tip is that there's this little utility called SAML Trace that you can, it's a plugin for Google Chrome,
Yeah.
and it will allow you to do a whole lot of real good troubleshooting. The one
You're
gonna do
stealing my
that.
thunder for a later section.
sorry.
But yes, I don't actually cover SAML Trace in there. But
The little caveat there is that you got to be real careful, because if you're going to send that to somebody, it keeps your password in there in clear text.
In
so
plain text,
be
yeah.
very careful.
Yeah, that is something that I actually did have a customer send to me, and I had to send back to him, "Hi, I'm very sorry, you need to change your password." So I've actually gotten quite a few passwords. I don't do anything bad with them. So the other Splunk integrations, UBI, also known as Caspita.
we bought a company.
We bought multiple
and
companies.
The old company name is all over the product still.
So it's incredibly similar. So it's basically going to be the same. We saw earlier in some of the slides that they did actually have a UBA specific integration. When available, try to use that one. When unavailable, you're going to want to try to use just the default Splunk Enterprise, put it in, download obviously the metadata file. This UBA specifically, it likes to be picky. There's a lot of errors that you're going to encounter. Splunkd.log will have basically what you can fill in with that, and there's a lot of SAML SMEs at Splunk. So you can just reach out to your account team and they can pair you with one specifically for UBA if you get stuck on it. It's much better to ask for help than to try to just brute force it. Phantom, you can probably brute force it. But I used Okta as the example for this. So the entity ID is going to be the one that Okta provides, as well as that. And then logout URL, it's just going to redirect. If you fail, there is also a backup. Question mark login type equals UBA, and you can use your native login for that. So Phantom, same thing. It has a default username, password, and then you can click if you actually want to use SAML. Authentication, basically the same as I've discussed before. I use Okta as the example. So you've got the issuer ID, and a lot of this is going to be filled. A lot of this, unfortunately, isn't necessarily filled in when you do an upload of a metadata. You can actually paste in the metadata, and once you click away, it'll populate a lot of it. But of course, double check your work. Make sure that you've got all of the values you need, because when you save it, it starts kicking in. You do need to make sure that all of your attributes come through. This is incredibly important when you're talking about specifically playbooks. If you don't have everything that you need, some of them will start failing and you'll be like, no, but I set up the playbook fine. Check that. And then common name, I've seen passed a lot, specifically with Shibboleth. Common name was passed instead of name. So in case you do need to break glass, Phantom's got you covered. You have the login, and then you just click the button to do SAML. So the lesser used things, oh, this is still me, AQR. So by default, and this is what I was mentioning earlier with SAM account name versus user principal name. User principal name is probably going to be the best value to pass 9 times out of 10. You can actually bypass this with, and the links are down here, but if you're using AQRs, you need the group name to be the group ID. That being said, you can have both the group name and the group ID in Splunk, and it will work effectively. You will be able to do it. So if you already have the Azure admin, you can just put it right next to it. And also, you do have a limit of 150 groups if you use get user info. You can go above that. Oh, this is also including nested groups. So if somebody's in a parent group and it gets like all of these permissions, it's going to cap out at 150. Yeah, so this is how you set it up. You're going to need your client ID and tenant ID. You will not have this in Active Directory Federation services. That is a very specific use case, and I do know where to grab it. So if you do need that, let me know, but that wasn't something that I could paste into this. Time to live, that's kind of up to personal preference. How long do you actually want it to last? I've seen as low as like 30 minutes. Okta. I have gotten a lot of rage emails about the super user permissions for Okta when you have to do this. You do have to be the super user when creating the Okta extension. I'm sorry. There is no way that I have found around it. There's nothing that I have been able to see that allows you to do anything less than super user for the extension. And I'm sorry. Basically same thing, except instead of tenant ID and client ID, you've got API key and base URL, and you're calling a different script up here.
Oh yeah, so now, big slog of how do you set up everything, right? Everyone's got that, right? Go home. No, but fortunately, things will go wrong as you try to set up SAML, because it's complicated. You're passing attributes from your identity provider to Splunk, so that way Splunk knows who you are, what groups you're in, and what's your name, what's your email. Passing that data, it's hard. So let's go in. And so one of the things I want to bring back to is remembering the parts of SAML. Most of your assertions that you care about, especially with login, are passing through your browser. Thus, you can have a browser extension and to help you in. I actually don't cover that particular browser extension in here. I use the in-browser developer tools. So you just set up Chrome or your other browser, open the developer tools, and have open to your network page, look through all the things, Make sure you set preserve log, because SAMLs you're usually redirecting between your identity provider and your relying party, your application. So check preserve log, that way you keep all the messages back and forth to both. But this is a lot of things, so which ones are we actually interested in? And, oh wait, I also forgot, there's other options too. You can use things like burp suite, Charles proxy, like a man in the middle, you're man in the middling yourself, but it's yourself, and so as others have mentioned, these are all of your HTTP messages. They have your cookies, they have your session IDs, they could have your passwords. Keep them safe, make sure what you're sharing, but then it's, okay, so what are we looking for? So going from the identity provider to the relying party, we have, or sorry, usually when you log into an application, you type application name and it goes, okay, I don't have a session, I need to request a login. So you get a SAML request, either via GET or via POST, and then going back, you get a SAML response from the identity provider back to your application. And so these have various common URIs to them. And so for Okta, it's usually the application, a slug, an identifier, ends in SSO, a SAML. If you're on Azure, it ends in SAML2, this URL path. If you're using ping, it starts with start SSO ping or SSO SAML2. And I didn't add Duo when we got acquired by Cisco just recently, so sorry I didn't add that in there. On the application side, most of them are SAML ACS, ACS standing for Assertion Consumer Service. This was something in the spec, and so everyone had a common path there. But, so then we go back to our tool and we notice, hey, yeah, I was using Chrome browser tools against, and so there I got the SAML with the SAML request, and there's a big string there, and I got a login, that's a post going the other way. Same sort of thing. This is Okta, and there's the app SSO SAML there, and I got the SAML callback login there. And so once we have that, let's go take a look at the response body. Looks like that. That's totally readable, right? It's a SAML response. And so I should probably take a little aside here. SAML redirect, yes, it's an option, and so that provides the SAML assertions over GET. But if you use SAML post redirections back and forth, these bodies can get very large. HTTP 414 is a thing. I decided to Photoshop a picture of Cat's cat because Mimi's a very long cat.
Yeah, she's like, if I'm holding her like this, she'll go down to like here, and her tail will go down to like here. She's a long cat.
But a lot of times in your identity provider, like this is Okta in particular, you have all your assertions for the user, but you're also passing, here's the full set of groups. Do you actually need to have Splunk know about every single group in your environment? You really only need it to know about, here's the groups I'm mapping in Splunk side, and so that would cut down that assertion that's going from your identity provider to Splunk drastically. Something to think about. There's trade-offs of that, because if I don't have a group in my assertion, I can't map to it.
True.
Anyway, take that base 64 blob, we decode it, and we see we got XML. I like using nice command line tools. If you're on a Mac, pb paste is awesome utility. If you don't know about it, takes your clipboard, you can just feed it into a pipeline and do other things like pipe in a base 64-D. Windows, you might like Notepad++. But what does this assertion actually mean? And so first, you have an issuer, or it'll actually say SAML2 issuer, or, well, SAML2 is an XML namespace. I'm not going to go too deep on XML, but it'll have the issuer. And you see this string here, and the issuer ID is on your Splunk side, and those have to match. Otherwise, things break. Subject is, who are you? This is like the username that is going to be created in Splunk if it doesn't already exist, or the one that already exists and we're mapping you to. So there's Alice Bluebird. And actually, this is also one thing to notice. I assert that this SAML thing is a bearer token. A SAML assertion is a credential in and of itself. That's another reason why to make sure to keep them secret. But there's, oh, sorry. Let me go back. Got your picture. Cool. No problem. And so, but yeah, that's These assertions are things to protect as well, but they also have not on or after or types of, conditions. When is it valid for, and who is it valid for? Remember Kat was talking about setting up your entity ID, make sure they match on both sides. It's like, hey, this is intended for my Buttercup Foods. I need to make sure on my Splunk side I'm listening for, I only want assertions for Buttercup Foods. And this is one of those things that makes our adversary from our explaining a little sad, because I can't just capture a SAML assertion for anything and use it against anything else. If I capture a SAML assertion for my application, yeah, I can reuse that, but that's why time limits are a good thing.
Yeah.
Signatures and certificates. Part of that, having that metadata file that you pass between Splunk and your IDP and vice versa is making sure that both sides have, here's the chain so I can validate the certificates. It's getting into actually how do I pull this out and deciding that it's a little too deep for this talk, but I will say the certificate that you have is right here. You can feed that into OpenSSL, base64 decode it, that's a dir form certificate, and you can actually get out, this is this particular certificate that is coming across. So maybe you can check hey, what certificate did I have on one side and the other, oops, I have a mismatch, that type of idea.
And that's going to be something that you will encounter if you're pulling, especially if you, like, again, if you were just pulling the leaf certificate, you want to validate that it's actually passing correctly.
So how many people have search head clusters in Splunk? Yeah. So when you set up SAML in a search head cluster, you want to make sure you check replicate certificates, because otherwise your certificate doesn't get to all your members of your search head cluster. How this replicates is over KV store. And so that's how the certificates get point A, point B, point C. There's actually a little fun little edge case of this, though. What happens when a search head cluster member dies and you have to replace it? Well, if you rebuild the search head cluster, it might take time for the KV store to replicate, and while that KV store is replicating, people hitting that search head can't log in using SAML because the certificate isn't there yet. You have to wait until KV store is restored on that node, and then you can reload off, and then you can go. Oh, yep, no problem. Clearing out old SAML users. There's a lot of people like, okay, I delete a user from my company. They can no longer log in because they're gone from the identity provider, but they're still there. How do I get rid of them? In Splunk, there's a API, it's called SAML user role map that you can use, and you can pipe a delete to it. That's about it.
If you email Kat, like a literal cat at splunk.com, I can give you basically the rest to pull like the full list of users, and then you can just basically isolate which ones you don't want there anymore.
But
Or you can kill them all.
Things you'll want to do is you want to reassign knowledge objects before you get rid of that SAML user, and also delete their user folder. It's stuff that you clean up.
Yeah.
It's fine. But I should also notice that in recent versions of Splunk Enterprise, in Splunk Cloud, and in new versions of Splunk, we actually have support for SCIM. Anyone heard of SCIM? Well, yep. So System for Cross-Domain Identity Management. And we actually only support one part of SCIM, unfortunately. So you have a user on both sides. You've set up, there are steps to set this up in Cloud. I'm unfortunately not covering them. But what happens is when you delete the user on your identity provider, there's a message that it sends over to Splunk to also delete that user, clean up their user directory as well. There's documentation. We only support it on Okta so far, but it's a new feature that's there, and also linked to SCIM Cloud for that protocol. Yes, sir.
So when changing from one IDP to another, do you have a tool to move?
Do we have a tool to move from one
Knowledge
IDP?
Objects and identity?
Well, so the trick there is as long as you can map, have your identity provider provide the same name into Splunk, they'll map to the same user and you don't have to do anything. If not,
yes.
That's a lot of pain.
Exactly. Okay.
So
I just wondered if you had a tool.
in terms of that, so if you're on-prem, then basically you're going to need to rename the user directory.
Yeah,
If you're in
unfortunately, cloud.
Okay, if you're in cloud, and that's actually something that I did encounter relatively recently, you can basically put a list of users together, and you can basically, I mean, with help, or you can just get PS to basically redo it all for you and then just hand it to you in a silver
Yeah,
platter.
there was another way. I was thinking that you could go reassign all the old knowledge object,
Yep.
old
That's a
user
lot
owned.
longer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's APIs that you can call and do that, yes.
Yeah.
And-
Well, somebody was suggesting you rename them to nobody so that in the future you don't have that issue ever again. And then,
Other than that, then everything runs as Splunk system user,
Yeah.
and then you have the quota problems of Splunk system user, and
Exactly.
yeah.
And also then you can't audit anything because you don't know who originally had
Right.
it, and yeah. So, but that is a way.
there's also,
Yeah.
issues everywhere. Okay.
Yep.
What's up?
I don't know if we reached full comments time, but you can fix that with your SAML provider as long as you can tell it what attribute to put in which thing, and then you don't have to rename all of your users because that sucks a lot. Note that that also works with roles,
9 minutes.
so you don't have to have GUIDs as roles because GUIDs are not for humans.
Well, the GUIDs as role thing has to deal with the script for Azure going back to figuring out what is in on the Azure side when Splunk is querying the identity provider to get back things.
You can fix that too.
Oh, really? Nice.
We're gonna chat.
Yes.
Very nice.
Oh yeah, then this is for clearing out, because we're covering all the different Splunk products. On Splunk Store, how do I clear out a SAML user? You go into the UI and there's a delete button for you.
Yeah, it's great. That one's a lot better, honestly, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, oh wait, sorry, there's a second button. You have to confirm, yes, I want to delete that button, that
Yeah.
user. Yep. But let's also get into troubleshooting, looking at logs. Let's talk about some Splunk enterprise logs that you might run into. No value found in SAML response. Like, look at these slides later. These are all the components that you might be interested in when it comes to SAML problems. No value found in SAML response is, hey, look, I might not have actually passing that attribute along as I go through. That might be configuration on your identity provider side. The second one, error message.
It's get user info.
This was the GUID problem that
Yeah.
you might run into.
Get user info is failing.
Is get user info is failing. The third one technically is not a SAML problem, it's a mapping problem. Is you might wind up with, I've logged in with SAML and then I can't edit my SAML mappings. Well, what happens is, like, oftentimes, like, I'll create a role in an application, I'll map to that role in the application, then I'll uninstall the application. Yeah. The SAML mapping is still there. And so then when you log in again, you have, hey, I'm this user, I have this role doesn't exist in Splunk.
That was my customer.
Yes, it was your customer.
Oh my gosh.
This role doesn't exist in Splunk, and when Splunk tries to verify your permissions for editing role mappings, you get this error message. And so it's actually go to the back and remove your SAML mapping manually for on enterprise. If you're on cloud, reinstall the application or reinstall a shell of the application that has that role. Then you can remove the mapping. Then you can uninstall the application again. Self-service, no fuss, no muss type of idea. But good thing to be aware of that you might run into. And
So how many of you guys are fed? Gonna need CAC? Sweet. Okay, glad to have you. So basically, you can also use SAML, and this is not relating to if you have Active Directory Federation services. That's completely separate. So we're actually going to do two ways to do LDAP. So this is the authentication.conf, and I have all of these, and then I also have additional ones based on which specific things you're using. And if you want to talk to me about CAC, I am one of the only people that knows it in the company. So I will take all of your questions, all of your emails. And if you are Army, congratulations, you're getting a patch in July that fixes your cannot find user. That was a long road. The web, it's not the longest of these, but basically the main thing to notice on this one is the username attribute has to be user principal name. If you are, that is the actual value that it is using in CAC. If you are not passing that value, it will return with it cannot find the user is not valid, cannot validate, just any one of those The rest of them do not matter as much. And you're going to be able to add the rest of this, you know, the rest
Still
of this.
matter, just not as much.
It does, yeah. Most of the time that I've seen it successful, it has been PIV. You can use the other values, but the majority of the customers that I've worked with, they always end up falling back to PIV, even though they want to use everything else. Server, you don't want to edit this too much. You're still using, the main thing to note here is you do need to use require client cert equals true. And if that is the case, you cannot have pass phases on your keys. And if you think that that's less secure, just remember, if you can log into the account, you can decrypt the pass phase and it's the exact same amount of security. So if you need to do it in Splunk Cloud, so ADFS SSO integration, basically you're going to download the SP metadata like we have talked about before and save it as a SIR file. You're going to import the Splunk cert as a relying trust into your Active Directory Federation services with the signing certificate revocation check equals none. If you don't do that, it's going to start failing. You're going to run it in PowerShell and then verify that both of the request required and authn request are enabled. That's the command for it. And a lot of this is the commands. If you're getting stuck on this, just let me know. And then you got to point it to the correct splunkcloud.mil relying trust properties. I'm wondering how many of you guys are actually in cloud because we only have like a couple mil people. And then step 3 is import the Active Directory Federation services, replace the certificates, and then basically just validate that everything else is correct, including the port. If for Splunk Cloud, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be using port 0. For Active Directory Federation services, you're going to be using port 443. These are just definitions. It's like just the more detailed stuff of what he wanted to know. Do we have any more questions?